Hello everyone, in this video today we are going to paint aurora borealis in 5 simple steps. I have some easy tips and tricks for you to get this light effect on northern lights perfect every single time. Alright, so to start, I will be using a flat brush and a round brush. I will also be using my limited palette of colors, mostly cerulean, indigo, some sap green, and I'm going to bring in some lamp black at the end. I'm also going to be using LARGE 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, and this pad specifically is glued on the sides because I'm going to be using so much water. But if you don't have a glued pad, just make sure to tape down the edges of your paper before you start. Step 1 is wet your paper and just like really wet it. You don't want puddles of water, but you want it to be very soaked into the paper because it needs to stay wet while we apply this Northern Lights technique across the paper. And we're already on to step 2. So step 2 is placing your paints. Now, you can't just put your paints right on the paper. There is a method to the madness. First, we're starting with our brightest, lightest color. In this case, I'm using a very bright turquoise cerulean color. And then as I make my way to the edge of the paper, we're going to start using darker colors like indigo. But not only is it important the colors that you're using, especially in the way that you're using it, but it's so important that you are leaving white space. The white space between the colors is what's going to make it feel like the sky is glowing. So as an example, you can see here on the upper right, I didn't leave enough space between the colors to let them breathe. So I can rinse my brush, tap it on a paper towel, and lift some of that color out, which brings a lot of lightness back into that area. Just be careful because the more brush strokes you have in a single area, it messes with the texture of your paper. So if you're lifting out or if you're trying to move the paint around too much, it can look really overworked when it's dry. I would encourage you to look at a reference photo and see what colors that you like in your aurora borealis. Once you have your colors figured out, the next step is shape. What shape are you trying to form? What feeling are you trying to get? And what direction are your lights going? It's really pretty when all of these colors are on the paper together, but if you really want that Northern Lights look when it's dry, they have this very swirly shape and just depends on the direction and the look that you're trying to achieve. So mine is kind of going from the upper left down to the right, and I'm using different colors within my blue scheme to kind of define some of these shapes and make more swirly patterns. And I rinse my brush, I tap it on a paper towel, and I lift color out, I create more swirls. I also really want the contrast between light, medium, and dark. And so my light is obviously going to be the white of my paper. The medium is more of my brighter turquoise cerulean blue, and then as I get to the edges, we're getting that really dark indigo. So I'm trying to balance all 3 of those colors in the shape that I've picked, and I don't necessarily want white only in the middle, cerulean kind of on the outside, and then the darkest indigo on the very edges. I kind of want all 3 of those colors to marry together in some places on the inside too. So this takes a little bit of practice to not overwork, but just follow your gut here, follow your pattern, and keep to those colors without losing any of your light. That's the biggest tip I can leave with you. Don't lose your light or your medium values, especially when you're trying to add the dark night sky on the edges. Now on my palette, I already had a brownish black color mixed up and I added indigo to that, but it's really sap green, some indigo, and a little bit of magenta to get that deep black color, but Payne's gray would be perfect for this, but you don't want anything that's too black because if you think about the night sky, it's more of those rich purpley blue colors, and we want it to complement this blue northern lights we've got going on, and if you do too much black or like straight black from the tube, it's going to fall very, very flat. And if you think about the night sky with these bright lights and colors in the night sky, it's not going to be very dark. It's going to be darker than the lights, but the lights kind of brighten it up. So it doesn't have to be the darkest part of this painting. We're going to paint silhouettes of trees below, so leave the darkest part for that. So we're mostly just putting this around the edge, but as I'm trying to merge these colors all together so it looks natural and my paper is drying, I tap my brush on my paper towel and I use my damp brush to help manipulate those colors. One of my tips is try not to overthink how it looks. Everything looks better once it's dried, so try to trust the process with that. All right, we're already to step number 4, and that is stars. Now, there's not going to be very many stars, and we're going to focus them more around the darkest parts of the edge of the painting, but I'm using white gouache. I dip my brush in water, I then dip it into the tube, and then I dip it into the water again, and I tap the back of my brush with a pencil very sharply. It gives me really beautiful splatter. I do this before I do the trees along the bottom so that there's no stars on the trees. We can just get all of our stars all over the painting, and then we can paint anything that we don't want stars on afterward. Step number 5 is to add your silhouette. Today we're adding trees. You could do mountains, but I like to, when I'm painting a northern lights and the focus is obviously on this big beautiful sky, a nice simple black silhouette of a landscape really grounds the painting. So I typically mix my black, but I feel like it's never quite as black as I need it to be when I'm painting a silhouette. So I love using lamp black. It is one of my all-time favorite blacks, and this is from my Daler Rowney palette that has that's the pan set. I love that pan set so much, and it did the job perfectly. I love the contrast between our deepest, darkest color in our sky, which is not very dark when you start using the lamp black, and these dark trees. So it looks very much like the sky is bright and shining and glowing, and that's causing all of these trees that we're going to paint to be in deep shadow. And I just really love the contrast. I love the silhouette of the dark trees against some of these really bright highlights in our sky, especially that white. So let's talk about painting trees, especially trees that are in silhouette, because I feel like it's a little bit different than just painting a tree in normal colors. First of all, when you're painting a silhouette, you don't have to worry about values. You don't want a light, medium, and dark value. We can go in with our deepest, darkest value and stay that way the whole time, using it in a really thick, creamy consistency. I've also switched to my size 4 round brush that's a lot smaller, and it is great for painting these textured pine needle shapes. I'm obviously not going to be using my flat brush for this. You could, it just will give you a little bit more geometric of a shape, and I wanted more of that organic, rounded, typical texture. Another tip for silhouettes is we're focusing more on the texture that the outside of the tree is giving us. We don't want a ton of white space and gaps between the tree. It's gonna look weird. We also want the base where we get down to the bottom to be full, like it's on a mountain or it's really thick with trees. So as I get closer to the bottom of the paper, I am not doing the texture anymore. I'm just kind of blocking in some solid black, and it really grounds the trees so it doesn't look like they're floating in the sky when there's too much texture and white space down at the bottom. We really want those grounded. Keep the tree shape simple. Because it's a silhouette, it doesn't really matter. We are doing a line down the center so we can get a general idea for the center of the tree. And then we're swiping left and we're swiping right, and we're creating this texture within the tree. We don't have to worry so much about the right brush strokes in the center of the tree and leaving all the right gaps. We want enough gaps that you can see that there are multiple trees here. We can see the difference between them a little bit, but you'll see that I will paint a tree and then I'll go back and I will fill in some of those white gaps between the trees, because it looks better if some of the areas are fuller and we leave a tiny bit of the white space for the texture. So I would say focus more on the outside texture and the general overall feeling of the entire tree line and not so much the individual trees. I also wanted this tree line to kind of follow the pattern that we did in the Northern Lights, coming up high from the left and going down lower to the right, but I wanted organic shapes in the trees, different heights within that pattern as we were going down. So that's how I'm creating the tree line. And there's a few minutes of me continuing to paint these trees and these silhouettes, and I know so many of you like to watch that process in real time, so I left that in the video here so you can kind of see how I manipulate this silhouette of the trees. But if you want to skip to the end, you can see the finished piece. Thank you all so much for being here with me while I painted this aurora borealis in 5 simple steps. I hope this video helped you see how easy it can be to paint northern lights, especially with some of the tips and the tricks that we talked about. It's so fun to experiment with different patterns and colors, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. I will see you all next time. Bye.